Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Stroshine. I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A window this morning. I'll be sharing your questions and comments as they come up. Please do feel free to speak up in this way at any time. Since this is a live event and we have a large number of people, you won't be able to share your mic or audio or camera with the group. But just use the Q&A window, type your questions and comments, and then we'll be sharing those with the presenter and with the rest of the group. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can email Danelle. She's our tech coordinator for this event. We will be recording this event for later review. One of our goals, we want to create an ongoing community. So now that you're part of this team, you may receive follow-up emails and chat messages. One of the exciting things we're running this week for the TCC MakerCon is an app-a-thon where you can learn to build a phone app. And there'll be even a contest for that. That's going on every day this week. Go back to the main MakerCon page and register for that event. Even if you missed today's session or you missed tomorrow's session, you can join anytime, and they'll be doing catch-up sessions. So we'd love to have you join that. Today's event, we're really looking forward to this. We have Linda Brandt here to give us an introduction. And there will be some opportunity for you to share the things that you do or create during this session. So I'll have in the chat, there'll be a link to a Google Drive where you can upload, snap a pic, take a screenshot and upload it and share it with the group. Linda, if you're ready, you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, I just want to make sure that my mic is on and everyone can hear me. Do I sound okay? All right, great. Well, my name is Linda Brandt. I'm here in Orlando, Florida today, and really happy to be with you at Tarrant County College for the MakerCon. It's really a privilege to be here. And I also want to thank Janae Corrado for inviting me to this event. Wonderful. I'm a psychologist. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Orlando, and I have a private practice. Part of what I do is work with individuals on their personal problems by using art and making as a mechanism or as a strategy to help people achieve better wellness and mental health. So what I'd like to do today is to share with you some of my work, some of my examples from clients that I've worked with, and to talk about some strategies and why making can be beneficial for mental health. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. I am myself an artist too, just so you know. And I'm also a faculty member at Saybrook University, which offers graduate programs in psychology and related fields. So that's my background, but a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today involves my private practice and my work with clients and various things connected to our mental health. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen with all of you. Now, can you all see the screen, my PowerPoint right now? No? Okay, so let me try. Let me see if I can get it going. I'm working on the control button here, but nothing's happening. So I'm hitting it.
Linda, if you can just click the share button.
Yeah, I'm hitting it.
And try to double click on it.
I am, and nothing's happening, so I don't know why that is. I'm double clicking and clicking away at the button that's a square with the arrow going up, and nothing's going on. Let me try to go to my PowerPoint and get back up to the beginning here. Okay, now I'm going to go back to you all screen. Let me try this, okay? How about this? Yeah? Okay, great. So in this presentation, I'm going to be addressing some of the mental health challenges that people are experiencing these days and what we can do to meet these challenges, or at least try to. So creativity and making has for a long time been associated with mental health, as you'll see, mainly because when we're making things, our minds are really occupied on the task at hand. And you don't have to have any particular skill to benefit from this, as you'll see, as long as you're able to get immersed in a task or into a flow state, as we say, you're going to find it beneficial and helpful. So today, I'm going to be talking about three main mechanisms by which making can facilitate mental health. And those three processes are a reconnection with play. This is the fun part, kind of getting your hands into something. Then there's the process of absorption or flow. I'm using these terms interchangeably. And lastly, we'll talk about the process of catharsis or externalization. All three of these mechanisms are what really drive the process. Okay, so many people are seeking help these days for mental health conditions, particularly just daily stress, chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. And of course, all of these problems have been exacerbated by the pandemic. I want to share with you some data from the CDC, which was collected in June of this year. And I'm just going to quickly hit the highlights here. In June of 2020, 31 people reported symptoms of an anxiety or a depressive disorder. 26% reported symptoms of a trauma or stress-related disorder. 13% reported having started or increased substance use in order to cope with emotions related to the pandemic. And 11% reported having seriously considered suicide in the last 30 days. Now, what's really interesting about this information, at least to me, is that they were able to compare it to similar studies from a year and 2 years ago. So we know that based on that data, reports of anxiety have increased threefold and reports of depression fourfold since the last data collection in June of 19. It has changed that much. And if you look down at the bottom where it says 11%, this number is double the number that was reported in 2018. What's really interesting about all this data, also I'll add as a little bit of a tidbit, is that loneliness seems to have stayed the same pre and post pandemic. And some people might wonder about that since we're all more isolated, we have less contact with people. But I think what really we're seeing with that data, which was recently published in American Psychologist, is that there was probably an epidemic of loneliness before the pandemic. So loneliness levels didn't have much room to move. They stayed about the same. Okay, for those of you who are not as familiar with the symptoms of an anxiety disorder per se or a depressive disorder per se, I wanted to just share the range of symptoms. So there's lots of different anxiety disorders. A lot of people are diagnosed with something called generalized anxiety disorder, but there's also panic disorder, social phobia, specific phobias. Many conditions make up the anxiety disorders as a group. And as a whole, they can have a range of symptoms, as you can see here on this slide. Some of the symptoms are physical, like tension in the body or tightness in the throat or chest. Some of the symptoms are cognitive, like worrying or having a lot of fearful thoughts. And some of the symptoms are behavioral, like avoiding certain situations that you associate with fear or anxiety. Now, depression, probably most of you are familiar with the general symptoms of depression. In order to meet criteria for depression, a person has to have either the first or the second symptom. They are predominantly sad mood or loss of pleasure or interest, which we call anhedonia. And taken as a whole, they also have to have a total of 5 symptoms altogether, one of which must be either predominantly sad mood or anhedonia. So to get a diagnosis of depression, these symptoms have to co-occur within the same 2-week period, and they have to include a kind of a cluster was what you're looking for. You're looking for a pattern of symptoms, such as changes in appetite, crying spells, feeling hopeless, feeling fatigued, difficulty concentrating, things like that. So we know that no matter what mental health condition a person is struggling with, stress can be an aggravating factor, and there can be many sources of this. So I'll just highlight a couple just for illustration here. I think in the digital age, one of the things I hear about a lot in my practice these days is fear of negative judgments by other people or negatively comparing oneself to others. And I think this is associated with people who use social media extensively and kind of get wrapped up in that activity a little bit more than perhaps is healthy. But many other things can be aggravating factors as well, such as feeling overworked, having financial concerns, feeling dissatisfied with your job, a sense of meaningless, like life has no purpose. The usual family and relationship conflicts can be problematic. Of course, isolation and loneliness can increase stress. And skipping down to the bottom, I don't want to neglect things like the environmental and social variables, like noise, overcrowding, and poverty, that on a day-to-day basis can really be an aggravating factor when it comes to our sense of wellness and calm. So why is chronic stress a problem for people? Why is anxiety a problem? Well, there's just tons and tons of papers showing that chronic stress in particular can compromise the immune system, which makes illness more likely to occur. It can make chronic health conditions worse. So if you have diabetes, if you have high blood pressure, it can make these conditions worse. Stress is associated with loss of sleep and attempts to ease the suffering through substance use, smoking, or overeating. But unfortunately, the more a person does those things, the harder it is to implement some of the healthy lifestyle choices that we know are good for people. So a vicious cycle can start with stress and related conditions. Luckily, there are many things that buffer against anxiety and depression. In psychology, we call mood lifting experience uplifts. These can be just things that brighten your day, like bumping into an old friend or getting a letter, maybe more likely these days, getting a letter from an old friend or having an unexpected good thing happen. That can be a buffer against anxiety or depression. Also, cognitive appraisal. Cognitive appraisal refers to how we think about the things that are going on in our lives. And I am going to come back to this one in just a second because it's kind of complicated, but it involves how we perceive, interpret, view, and explain the various things that we experience in our life. Another buffer against anxiety and depression and chronic stress is having a sense of meaning or purpose. So the people who report the greatest levels of contentment or happiness are those who feel like their work is meaningful. And most of the time, what that entails is providing some kind of service or doing something that is greater than oneself. So something that takes you beyond your own self desires and needs and puts it out there to being of service to a greater cause. Social connections are really important for us, and especially humor, really important for us for dealing with the usual stress and anxiety. Self-care, sleep, diet, exercise, I think that goes without saying. And nowadays, meditation, yoga, and breathing are really considered kind of integral to wellness and mental health. And that's kind of evidenced by the rise of all the different apps for meditation, which I think a lot of them are really good. Limiting media exposure is critical these days, and this is what all the experts are recommending. If you're overexposing yourself to anxiety related to the virus or other things, it's just not so good for people. So limiting it, making a time of the day when you can read the headlines or read the news, but not constantly every hour. And another thing to buffer against anxiety and depression is making, which we're going to really focus on today during my talk. But before I do, let me just dip back to the cognitive appraisal, because I think this part is really important and I think everybody can probably benefit from this. I found this nice little graphic here at the University of California, San Francisco website, and it's just it's kind of an example of a mindset that can be helpful in reducing stress and anxiety. So this is called radical acceptance, and it's a radical acceptance of the fact that we cannot control everything in the world. And those things that we can't control, like the actions of other people or predicting what's going to happen in the world, these are the things we need to really let go of. And when we find that our minds are taking off and pondering or getting caught up in these types of thoughts, it's a good thing to remind yourself to let these things go, to let them just kind of drift away. Don't engage with them. Don't start ruminating about them, because it'll only raise your anxiety or depression. Now, that's one reason why meditation has become so important these days, is that it does help a person do better at monitoring and controlling the thoughts that are always going through our mind, many of which are negative or scary. Because once you are aware of those fearful thoughts, like, gee, I wonder how long this pandemic is going to last, once you are aware of those fearful thoughts as they race across your mind, then you can do a better job at identifying it as something you cannot control, and then focus on what you can do. Focus on, okay, I can take a few deep breaths, I can have a good attitude today, and so on and so forth. So on to making. Actually, let me just take a quick pause right now in case there were any questions. And I don't see the chat thing anymore, so I don't know if there are questions at this point.
Not yet, Linda, but as we said at the beginning, everyone feel free if you've got questions or things pop up or experiences you want to share, feel free to put those in the Q&A and I will share them with Linda in the group.
Okay, sounds good. Then I'm going to keep on going. So in most cases, when we talk about making, we're talking about working with your hands to create something, whether it's a sewing project, a craft project, art, or some other material thing. It can also be food and cooking and baking. I also just want to point out that, for the purpose of this presentation and the kind of concepts that I'm going to be going over, it can also involve, it doesn't necessarily have to be working with your hands. It can be, for example, writing, creative writing, or creatively working with the tools of science and technology. Whatever activity that you can become engrossed in that you like will work for the purpose of this presentation and for, when we think about activity as therapy, I guess, really. So because I'm most familiar with visual art and making through visual art, the talk is going to focus somewhat more on image making today, but keep in mind that's only one avenue. Okay, so we know that image making has been with us for thousands of years, and humans have long used images to express and communicate and document their life experiences. So some of the earliest examples are, of course, these wonderful ancient cave paintings. And this image was taken from the Chauvet cave in southern France. And these ancient human painted images were completed, they think, approximately 36,000 years ago. So it's a long time that people have been documenting their experiences and images. And we don't have to look far to see lots of examples of this throughout history. In many ways, as I see it as a psychologist, is that image making is in many ways like meaning making, and we are driven to tell stories and make meaning out of our existence, and that's part of what motivates this throughout time. Psychologists and psychiatrists took an early interest in what images mean for an individual and their development. So Carl Jung, who's pictured here, was among the first to explore the connections between image making and psychological functioning. A lot of people don't realize that Jung was a Mason and an artist himself. And during his own life, from 1918 to 1919, Jung created a mandala every single day. So it was part of his, almost like we would use a visual journal now. He had a kind of a sketchbook type thing, and he created a mandala or a circle drawing every day. He believed that the mandala functioned as sort of like snapshots of his psyche or a reflection of his psychological state for that day. So his daily mandalas were kind of like a record that he kept to study his own psyche over time. And nowadays, mandalas are still popular. So when I say mandala, it technically translates as sacred circle. It's an archetypal form. Again, that's a Jungian term. And if you look at the upper right, those are two examples of mandalas. Mandalas do not have to be symmetrical. They can be however they turn out. But lately, there's been a great resurgence in popularity of making mandalas, as well as soul collages, vision boards, dream boards, and that just shows me that people have this instinct to express and to delve into one's own psychological realities through image making is really alive and well. So back to this slide about the 3 mechanisms through which making can facilitate mental health: reconnection with play, absorption and flow, and catharsis and externalization. One thing I'll add to that is that, particularly when we talk about absorption and flow, making helps us stay present-centered, and that's a big part of how it works. But we're going to go through these one by one and give you a chance to kind of participate as we go. First one will be reconnection with play. So I hope all of you have at least 5 or 6 sheets of paper with you and something to write with. You don't have to have a lot of fancy materials today. Just a pen or a pencil and maybe 6 sheets of paper is all you need. And we're going to go ahead and dive into some actual making exercises, sort of to give you a feel for the kind of work that might be done in the context of art therapy, and also just to show how all of this works. So you might recognize this individual. Pablo Picasso is reputed to have said that every child is an artist, and the problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. So it's true that a lot of us do lose our connection with play as we get older. But what I found in my clinical practice is it really doesn't take much to get people back into the groove. So sometimes people are a little bit anxious at the start, and then they realize that it's safe and it's fun, and they get into it over time. So we're going to go ahead and do an activity now. And what I want you to do is take one of your pieces of paper and make a big, messy scribble on it with whatever writing implement you happen to have. And I'm not going to give you very much time on these activities, partly because we only have an hour today, and also because I want you to work fast so that you don't overthink the process. The faster you work, the better, really. So make your messy scribble on one piece of paper with whatever drawing implement or writing implement you have. And then take another piece of paper and crumple it up into a ball. I don't know if you can see me. I just crumple it up like this into a ball. So now you have your scribble and your crumpled paper. So next thing you want to do is take and uncrumple your paper. Hopefully you can see me. I can't see myself. Uncrumple your paper and flatten it out like this and kind of put it down there next to your scribble. All right, now you got them both there. So what you want to do now is just take a minute and look at the lines and the shapes and the spaces that are created by your scribble and by the folds in your paper. Just take some time and reflect on it. Just kind of let it wash over you in a sense. You might want to turn the paper around in different orientations so that you can look at it in different ways. And imagine, just like you might look at the clouds and find an image in the clouds, imagine finding an image in either the creases of the paper or the lines and shapes of your scribble, one or the other. I have no idea what's going to come up for you, and that's part of the fun of the process, is that we're starting from randomness. So just see what images emerge out of the randomness. There might be more than one that you see. You know, you might see lots of things coming out. But whatever you see, pick one of the perceptions that you're finding from either the scribble or the folded paper, and just take a couple of minutes to develop it into an image. So what you want to do is not make it into any kind of elaborate drawing necessarily, but just sort of take a minute or two to make an image out of it so that somebody else who looked at your scribble or your crumpled up paper would also be able to see what you're seeing. And again, you want to work quickly and without too much thought, because essentially the point of this activity is to kind of get you back into the spirit of play. We use this activity in art therapy with clients as sort of a warm-up because it's fun and it's simple and most people can do it and enjoy it. So take another couple of minutes to maybe just draw out what you see. And what you might notice is that, maybe something comes up that really surprises you, or that you didn't expect to see, or that you feel kind of funny about. Well, that's all part of the process. So I think the difference in the real value of an activity like this is that it gets us into more of a receptive mode of being. Instead of trying to force an image into something, we're letting an image come to us. And then we're just sort of taking the cues to develop it further. A little bit of history on this activity. Florence Kane was an American art therapist who's usually credited with developing this. There were other people too, such as Donald Winnicott, a British psychoanalyst who used something very similar to the scribble drawing with his clients. Okay, so hopefully some of you have made something, and maybe it's really funny or very surprising. I want to share with you next an example from clinical practice here. So sometimes scribble drawings lead to some interesting outcomes. This was made by a female client, age 29, during her first therapy session with me. This client had a history of trauma and grew up as a child of parents, both of whom were dependent on alcohol. So she made her scribble drawings, and then she created this out of the scribble. This enabled the client to talk a little bit more freely about what she called the confusion in her head, all of the confusing thoughts and feelings, and also about her experience of needing help untangling all of the mess that was in her head, all of the confusion that was in her head. I'll point out too that she didn't exactly follow the directions of letting an image emerge out of the scribble. Instead, she took and used the scribble as kind of like she drew around the scribble, or she incorporated the scribble in a meaningful way into like a larger image. So sometimes people do take the exercise that you offer, and they kind of go on their own with it. And that's actually a good thing, because that helps me to understand what's going on with the person a little bit better. I'll also share this wonderful little diagram. This is done by a professional artist. But I thought it was really appropriate for this age of COVID-19. God, there is so much, because it really feels like that some days. And I also wanted to share this one. This was not, of course, done by a therapy client of mine. This is a professional artist, but I also really like the image because it looks like it might have started from a scribble. I don't know that for sure, but kind of looked that way to me. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next thing. I have a second exercise for you. I hope I'm not moving too fast, but we do have a lot to do today. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Here's another quick activity that can help facilitate a reconnection with play. So we're still on that first mechanism, reconnecting with play. And we're going to try it now. So this time your directions are to take a blank piece of paper and draw 6 circles on your paper, however you want to represent them. Your circles can be in any size and in any arrangement. I think I'll go ahead and do this along with you so that I have an idea of how long it's going to take. So you want to make your 6 circles. Okay. After that, you're going to use your imagination. Let your imagination run wild. The circle is an archetypal symbol. We've already been talking about mandalas, right? So I want you to take each of those circles and turn it into something else. Make an image out of it. Just have fun and let the ideas flow. So for example, you could make a bug, like the example there on the right, or you could make anything else that the circle reminds you of. If you're really stuck with this and you don't know what to make your circles into, just look around you. Circles are a part of our environment, and they make up so much of our physical material world. You won't have to look far before you see something in your environment, I'm guessing, that has a circle and that you could develop one of your circles into. So I'm going to just kind of pause here for a minute or so while you all work on your circle drawings, and then I'll tell you more about this activity and where it comes from. So again, we just want to have fun with this, play with it, come up with as many ideas as you can. Maybe you combine two of the circles into one thing. Depends on how you drew them. Lots of possibilities. Anybody have one? Well, I hope that you've had a chance to at least do 2 or 3 by now. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'll explain a little bit about this little task that you just did. This was an adaptation from a formal test of creative thinking called the Torrance test of creative thinking. And what it is it involves a test of divergent visual thinking. Now, I wasn't testing you with this activity. I adapted it so that it was just for fun. And that's usually how I use it in the therapy process, especially, you know, if it's a kid or if it's someone first time doing art therapy, something like that. You want to pick activities that are fun and easy and non-threatening. And this is an example of one of those activities. But I took it from a formal test, and that test measures divergent visual thinking. So divergent thinking is the ability to generate possibilities. And I don't know if some of you maybe have heard of some of the older creativity tests where they say name everything that you can do with a brick, like all the functions you can think of for a brick. So you could say, okay, well, a brick can be used to build something, a brick can be used as a weapon, you know, a brick can be used as a paperweight or a bookend, and so on and so forth. And you're supposed to generate all the uses of a brick. That's also a divergent thinking test, but it's verbal. So the circles task is a nonverbal or a visual kind of divergent thinking task, visual divergent thinking instead of the usual verbal. And that's how it was traditionally used. So on the actual test, a person is given a worksheet of 30 circles, lots of them, like they all look the same. They're all the same size and they're kind of arranged in almost like a grid type thing. And then they're timed, you know, so there's a time limit. You're supposed to come up with as many different solutions to the circle as you possibly can. So it does help kind of free up the mind, and it could be used as a warm up for other types of art activities. I think maybe some visual problem solving or design art activities potentially. Okay, now we're going to move on and talk about the second mechanism of action, which is absorption and flow. So in addition to reconnecting with play, absorption or flow states can occur when we're deeply involved in making something. And this is a different mechanism, of course, but it can also be associated with feelings of well-being and kind of forgetting about your worries, forgetting about the things that are pressing in your life. So you might have heard the term flow before. It was popularized in a 1990 book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Very difficult name to pronounce, so we usually call him Dr. C instead. So flow states involve a shift in consciousness. So whenever we enter a flow state, we're moving out of ordinary thinking reality into really more or less a timeless place and space. Flow states are characterized by periods of great productivity and high levels of absorption. So this will happen when you're having a really good day, maybe working in your studio or at your computer. You notice that ideas flow really easily and you make a lot of progress. We also lose track of time during flow states, and oftentimes forget to eat. I mean, it's so absorbing and so intense that we just keep working away. And of course, they're usually considered positive experiences. It's not like it's so joyful while you're in the moment, but when you stand back after the period of productivity is over, it feels good to look back on it. Also, I'll add, in order to facilitate flow states or absorption, the level of challenge in the task has to be just right. If you're working on something that's too easy for your skill level, you will probably not get into a flow state because you'll get bored. If you're working on something that's too challenging for your current skill level, flow also is unlikely because you're going to be frustrated with that steep learning curve. So getting just the right level of challenge that matches where your current skill level is really important when you talk about trying to facilitate absorption and flow. And I think that can happen just automatically with the right activity and the right level of challenge. Rollo May, this is Rollo May. He was an American existential psychologist and also an artist, and he frequently wrote about art and the creative process. So I just wanted to point out, while we were talking about flow states, that 15 years before the book Flow was published, May published The Courage to Create. And in that book, May asserts that the creative process involves an intense encounter with the world, characterized by high levels of absorption. So we're sort of talking about the same thing here. He states that absorption, or being caught up in something or wholly involved, are ways of describing the state of the artist or the scientist when creating. And this also describes many times the child at play. So May was using different terms in The Courage to Create. He was using words like encounter with the world, high levels of absorption, wholly involved. But I think he was really tapping into a very similar process as was later expounded upon in the book Flow.
I'll jump in there for a second because that's actually personally relatable. Just last year, it's interesting, some of the things you brought up. I read one of Rollo May's other books, Man's Search for Himself, and was so fascinated by it that I went and found The Courage to Create and shared it with a friend of mine who's a painter. And we ended up kind of reading, we each read one of his works. She read the one on Courage to Create. I read Man's Search for Himself. And it was interesting because for me, I'm more of a lexical, procedural, linear thinker, analytical, and she's, as an artist, is creative. And seeing how those concepts played out side by side, his kind of general themes, like you say about flow, was interesting to see and generated a lot of interesting conversations. One of the other things about the previous thing, when you're talking about flow, that's something we in the education field run into a lot. The concept that education science refers to is desirable difficulty. You know, that thing of you want a task to be difficult enough that the students are engaged, that they're interested, and that they actually are having to work just enough to learn. But you don't want it to be so difficult that they become dispirited, disheartened, disappointed, frustrated, and then just kind of give up and say, oh, I hate math, I'm terrible at math. And then they quit forever. And by second grade, they've learned I can't do math. So it's interesting how a lot of these concepts really show up in many different disciplines: art, education, science, philosophy.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I think about the process of scaffolding, of trying to kind of get a person right at the level of doing something that challenges them to just the next step, and supposedly the most helpful way to facilitate learning. That's a great point. It is similar to flow in that sense. Very similar. You know, and maybe that's part of the, I think it's true that when you're able to kind of make that next step or challenge and you get it, that's a time when the motivation to practice and get better is actually there. So kind of capitalizing on that momentum of learning is really important. Thank you for that. Any other comments before I move? I'm really mindful of the time, and I've got two more exercises. So are there any other questions while we're pausing?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. All right. I keep going then.
Mhm.
So I'm ready to, so hopefully the exercises we've done so far have kind of demonstrated a little bit about reconnecting with play. Now, sometimes reconnecting with play can lead to a flow state. It can be a way in if you're having a creative block. Just put no pressure on yourself and play. But the flow state itself, as we've mentioned, has to be just exactly the right level of challenge. So the conditions are important. And I think it's also important to have a block of time when maybe you're not going to be interrupted too, which is hard to find sometimes. So moving on to another process that facilitates mental health is what I call catharsis and the related idea of externalization. So the word catharsis, it comes from the Greek for cleansing or purification. And what it really means is the release of painful or challenging emotions. And it's generally believed to have a positive or a healing effect on people when they're able to just express what they're feeling. Giving voice to feelings is a really important part of self-care that sometimes gets neglected. We definitely address this in therapy all the time. So catharsis can occur through verbal dialogue, as in your traditional therapy mode, or it can happen through image making. So that's what we're going to look at next. I really like this slide because it shows, I think, this is by artist Matteo Deneen. I think it really captures the processes of catharsis and externalization. Little Red Riding Hood here is expressing her feelings, thoughts, and experiences through this chiseling out this wolf sculpture here. And so her own struggle is externalized. That's what we mean by externalization. She is giving it form, concrete reality that's outside of herself. And that can lead to a greater sense of conscious control over that struggle. Now, maybe the wolf is a real person from her past, or maybe the wolf is something she's struggling with internally. We don't know. But she is hammering it out, literally, and giving it that concrete expression, which is inherently therapeutic and helpful for people. One of the ways that we do this in therapy is through an exercise called emotional X-ray. So I'm going to challenge all of you to do this. I hope I can go a little bit over 1 p.m. Do I have time? I hope.
Yes, we do. I'm seeing
Okay.
nodding heads among the team.
Okay. I won't go too far over 1, but I'm a little bit behind. Okay. So emotional X-ray is one of the exercises I use to facilitate catharsis and externalization in the therapy setting. So here's how it goes, and I invite you to try this, okay? Imagine that someone could take an X-ray of your current emotional state. The X-ray would show how you're feeling right at this moment. So take a few moments to consider the mix of feelings that you might be having right now. Does one emotion stand out more than others? So an emotional X-ray is just a moment in time. It's going to be one thing right now, and it'll be something else in an hour. But whatever it is that you're feeling, what you want to do is take your piece of paper and whatever you have to write or draw with, and see if you can represent what it would look like visually. Your X-ray might show recognizable images, or it could be completely abstract. It definitely does not have to look like a real X-ray. In fact, it might only be just a collection of shapes and colors. The point is you can make it look however you like, whatever is the most real for you right now. So I'm going to allow a couple of minutes for you to work on this, and then I'll share a little bit more from my practice. Maybe give it about 2 or 3 minutes just to get a start on it. What I find with working with clients is that some things are, especially when it comes to emotions, um, sometimes words don't quite convey what a person is feeling. And this is certainly the case with a lot of children because they haven't developed the vocabulary or the verbal skills to describe what they're feeling. But it's also true for a lot of adults. You know, think about people who have been through various traumas. Um, their the language they have to try to put into words what they've experienced is sometimes not quite sufficient. So activities like the emotional X-ray can really begin to get at that for certain individuals. But the emotional X-ray doesn't have to be a major revelation or a deep dive into trauma or anything like that. It can just be, I wonder how I conceptualize feelings to look like, you know, and it's sort of a opportunity to just scan your emotional experience, right? Uh, and um, and try to represent it in a way that you normally don't do. So the range of possibilities for the emotional X-ray can be really wide. I'm just sharing a few examples. You know, the important thing is with this type of exercise is that they provide an opportunity to externalize feelings that can be difficult to manage. You know, what does anxiety look like, or what does sadness look like, or what does fear look like? You know, um, it can be a starting point for a deeper discussion for a person's. In a related vein, sometimes as an alternative to the emotional X-ray instructions, I'll simply ask clients to make an image that expresses how they feel. So this is a really common art therapy exercise. Just draw something that shows how you feel. So here's an example from a 27-year-old client who grew up under really difficult circumstances. Her father was a hoarder and her mother left the family. And in her family of origin, feelings were, as she said, not allowed. So you had to always put on a big smile and pretend everything was fine. So-called negative emotions were really discouraged and shut down. So most of the early drawings done by this particular client were all happy, as you can imagine, because for her, that's how you present yourself. You don't reveal those darker emotional states. So through drawings, this individual was able to begin to start to give expression to what she would call the negative emotions. I don't really like to call things negative emotions because I think all feelings have a role in our lives and a purpose. But people use that expression a lot. So in this case, she was able to put some of those feelings on paper, expressing them, again, kind of the purifying or idea of catharsis. And with the externalization, it gives you a mechanism to get a little distant from it and talk about it and maybe integrate the experience into your reality a little more fully. As I said earlier, kids take naturally to this type of work. This image was drawn by a 9-year-old girl. This was really early on in my career. This 9-year-old, who I call Maddie, was struggling with a range of feelings. So her mother had recently remarried, and this little girl was not getting along very well with her stepfather. She felt trapped, sad, and helpless. And I think too, she was really grieving her previous life and her previous world where it was just her and her mother. Now she had to accommodate this stepfather into her life and into the family, and it was really challenging for her. So just from looking at this image, you can imagine as a therapist, you can really understand much better what a person is experiencing if you have them draw their feelings than if you just say, how do you feel? Because if I say, how do I feel? She might say sad, but this image tells me a lot more. And by the way, this could be an emotional x-ray too, because at that moment, that's what she was experiencing. Actually, I didn't give her the emotional x-ray instructions. I just said, draw how you feel, but it could be, this could come out from an emotional x-ray activity just as easily.
I'm curious. I noticed in that drawing in particular, there are a few different colors at work. What role do you find color plays in people expressing their feelings? Do you seem to get equivalent results by just handing someone a pencil and having them draw their feelings versus if you give them an option of multiple colors, does that seem to bring out different kinds or different levels of expression?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of times I make especially for early cases, like early in the therapy process, I'll use media that are easy to control, because easy to control media like pencils generate less anxiety than things like paint for people. And I let them choose what they want to use. So there will be people who only use pencil, no color. And to me, it's why you never know for sure. You have to check this out with the person. Everybody is different, but sometimes that can be indicative of, anxiety or difficulty with emotions, things like that. Those are hypotheses I just keep in the back of my mind. Sometimes a lot of strong color, and I have had people take soft pastels and just do nothing but just go back and forth on the page with red. Sometimes strong colors like that are indicative of high emotionality or even poorly regulated emotion, But I never like to say that it always is, because everybody's an individual. And just like with dreams, you don't translate a symbol one-to-one with a meaning. It's sort of the same with these art therapy elements like color. So blue doesn't always mean calm, red doesn't always mean anger, but you check that out with the person. I see you just covered the page with red. What does that mean for you? And that's kind of the key, because then you let the person make their own interpretation about, about what they've created.
Interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the emotional x-ray. We've talked about draw your feelings. Another way into this is to look at relationships through the same sort of lens of catharsis and externalization. And this image was created by a 64-year-old woman who experienced emotional and physical abuse as a child. I do see a lot of people who have experienced emotional and physical abuse as a child. It seems like almost all my examples involve that to some way, shape, or form. So I asked her to draw something that would have represented her relationship with her mother. And this is what she made. So she was able to sort of see herself as a child and process what it felt like to feel distant and disconnected from her mother and really unloved, to be honest. And this became a starting point for her to begin grieving over some of the things that she experienced as a young girl. So again, I think this image is tremendously powerful, because she's so small compared to the figure of the mother, and the mother is so stiff and sort of non-personal that it really speaks volumes about how she felt. And of course, there's that added element of the little stuffed animal that she's clinging to for comfort. It says so much more. If I ask her, tell me what your relationship with your mother is, she might say, well, we weren't very close. And look what I find from, look what I learned from the drawing. It's just, and then you learn more from how the person makes the drawing too. Do they dive right in? Are they tentative? Those are all details that you sort of take in along the way. So I wanted to wrap up today with a final exercise that's maybe a little less intense. So, and maybe something that will leave us in a calm and relaxed state of mind. So let's look at the process or the potential of image making to bring about a state of relaxation or calm. When we get engaged in any kind of drawing activity, if we, it tends to focus the mind. So all the fearful thoughts, worries about what's going to happen next, regrets, whatever things are usually plaguing your mind, they drop away temporarily. And I think it really serves that function for us. One of the activities that does this best is the mandala, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to try a new and different way of approaching this task. And I'll talk about mandalas quickly at the end. So here's the activity just for fun now. Get another piece of paper. And we're going to start with just a quick visualization. So you're going to create something in your imagination today and then draw it. Close your eyes for a moment and take a few deep belly breaths. A belly breath is when your belly goes out on the inhale, and usually you're breathing through your nose, and then your belly goes in on the exhale. So you want to take some nice deep breaths just to get yourself in a state of relaxation and receptivity. Letting your body and your mind kind of just float and see if you can be fully present. This last exercise involves imagining what the absence of stress and anxiety might look like. So as you take your deep breaths and get into a present-centered state of mind, just let an image come to you that might represent the complete absence of anxiety. Most of the time when we make things, we're drawing a particular thing, the presence of something, but today we're going to draw the absence of something. So maybe you would associate the absence of anxiety with certain colors or shapes, lines, or forms. There might be something recognizable in the representation that emerges for you, or it could be something completely new. So try to get the image in your mind first. And then when you're ready, grab your last sheet of paper and take a minute or two to try to represent that image visually. You can use whatever materials you have on hand to do that. And as you're working on it, I'll just explain that, many people use breathing activities, deep breathing exercises, self-statements to calm themselves when they're having a lot of anxiety. And this image that you're going to create today can function as a tool as well, something you can take along with you. And when you're needing to calm down or de-stress or relax, you can invoke this image that you're making today, because you're processing the visual image in your imagination, of course, but you're also processing it visually in the image that you're making. And just like with any other art therapy exercise, like the ones we've been doing today, there's no right or wrong with this, and there's no particular skill level that's needed. It's just something simple for you. If you're not making anything, and actually if you're not doing the activity, you can always just elaborate this in your imagination. The making of it, the putting it outside yourself in an external form, I think is one step deeper, but you'll still get something out of just imagining it. So I know we're a little short on time. I'll just show a few things that I picked up at various places. We just talked about color. A lot of people associate the color blue with calmness. So maybe your image is just a certain shade of blue. I mean, that would be fine, right? Or maybe it's something that invokes a memory, like gazing at the stars and imagining just the wonder of the universe. I mean, the point is it's your individual image. So however far you've gotten so far on the absence of anxiety, just know that that's yours to take along and yours to develop further. And I think if we had more time, like if this were a longer workshop and we had 20 minutes to work on this, you might also notice that your blood pressure goes down while you're thinking about it because you're focusing on it and because you're focusing on the total experience of the absence of anxiety, not just the concept, but what it looks like and what it feels like. It can really change the state of your whole body in the moment. I'm going to wrap up now with a quote from Carl Jung. He was discussing the impact of image making, and he said, "A patient needs only to have seen once or twice how much he is freed from a wretched state of mind by working at a symbolical picture, and he will always turn to this means of release whenever things go badly with him." Now, I've mentioned mandalas a lot today, and as you know, Carl Jung made his own mandalas for a period of time, one every day. And this is an example of one of Carl Jung's mandalas. Certainly a later image in 1955, not one of the earlier ones. But I just wanted to explain really quickly why he thought mandalas were so good for calming the mind. So he really thought that making a mandala was helpful when we're feeling anxious, scattered, or pulled in all different directions. Jung conceptualized the circle as an archetypal form, it kind of something that transcends time and culture. It's also a container. It pulls together disparate elements just by its very nature. And he believed that by aligning the mind, the emotions, and the thoughts with this archetypal form, it had the effect of pulling in, unifying, and organizing information in the mind, in the psyche, as it was called back then. So while we don't have time to do mandala drawing today, I'll just offer that as an activity that has a really deep kind of historical roots. And I know we don't have much time for questions, but if there are any, I'm open.
Linda, one question is, since this whole week of MakerCon, there are so many different kinds of making and contexts of making things that we try to focus on and kind of keep our focus shifting around. One of the questions we all tend to ask ourselves when we're thinking about this conference is what makes a maker? So in your presentation, there's a lot of focus on making something, a drawing, a doodle, a crumple, a squiggle, an image in the mind even, and making that motivated from, of course, in your practice, a lot of that might be dealing with trauma or negative experiences. And I want to tie that back to Rollo May's book that you mentioned, Courage to Create, since that's kind of what the book is talking about, is being motivated to create something based on more than just the trauma that you felt or the negative experiences. What do you think makes a maker? What creates that transition between someone making based on some internal, they kind of have to for some negative reason, versus they want to spontaneously experience that joy of creating something on their own?
Yeah, I'm not sure what actually makes a maker, but I know that there are certain characteristics of people who are more likely to be makers. And one of them is a personality variable called openness to experience. Some of you may have heard of the Big Five personality inventory. It's a very common and well-researched tool that's used in personality assessment and research. And there's a construct or a dimension on that instrument called openness to experience, people who have kind of an open and curious mind. And I would tie that back to the connection to the childhood and the play. I really do feel that artists in general, or people who are curious and questioning, they hang on to that fun, playful capacity, probably more so than other people. And I don't think that I do think this is open to anybody. So if a person has not in the past been so much a maker or a creator, maybe, I don't think that it's impossible to do that. But some things may have to be dealt with first, right? So for some people, there are a lot of rigid rules in their family history, a lot of judgments or whatever. And that stuff kind of has to be swept away so that they're able to reconnect it with the pure experience of childlike experimentation and joy, you know. So I do think that openness is a very strong quality, and it's been shown experimentally as well to be more common among people who align themselves or identify themselves as at least as artists, if not makers.
Thank you. Another one of the things I noticed actually when you first had us close our eyes and told us to kind of take some breaths, and we're kind of relaxing, and I'm relaxing, and I'm trying, because I'm someone who wants to do the thing right. So I'm trying real hard to relax. I'm really working on relaxing. And then you asked the question, imagine what the absence of anxiety would look like. And I immediately started laughing because I realized I was trying so hard to not be anxious, trying to achieve the absence of anxiety. I was anxious about my inability to achieve the absence of anxiety. So then I thought, how would I depict laughter? Laughter would actually be a wonderful reference image to go back to diffuse anxiety. You know, that's kind of why we laugh. We laugh as an expression of anxiety, of kind of relief, anxiety, surprise. And I thought that was interesting. I wonder how often you have in your practice where people maybe express that they don't know how to translate what they're feeling or thinking into an image. You know, how would I depict laughter? I don't know. That would be different for each person. How do you lead people to be able to, who maybe are having difficulty getting started with making something, from the idea to letting them actually manifest that physically?
Yeah, I think I did throw some pretty difficult activities into this talk. I think the emotional x-ray is a really challenging one, and I think the absence of anxiety is a really challenging one. So if I was seeing a person in therapy, I probably wouldn't throw this at them right away. I would probably have them do a lot of more simpler things first, or some basic things about expressing feeling. And then, you know, as a person kind of gets more acclimated, it just flows naturally, and it doesn't really require that much instruction. I think the important thing is that a person feels safe so that they can shut off that judging part of the mind, which is so commonly plaguing us, you know. And that is something that I work with people on quite a lot, is kind of going back to that graphic that I shared about things that you can't control and whatever. Sometimes people get obsessed with, am I doing it right? And in this case, it's not a particularly helpful rumination, right? So you would simply learn to just let those types of thoughts just bypass them, you know, and get back to the present moment. And this is why sometimes I do recommend for a lot of people meditation as an adjunct to therapy, because it does help people learn to just stay in the present moment without a lot of negative judgment. Or if you do have the negative and the judging thoughts, to learn how to let them float by instead of grabbing onto them or struggling with them or questioning them or, getting overly involved.
How often then, if you as an adjunct to meditation, we might go to the gym 3 to 5 times a week, do yoga a little bit every day. How often do you do these exercises, these art therapy exercises or making sessions? Is it daily, weekly? How often would you have someone go through those?
Oh, it varies. So there are some people who are making things all the time, and since we're now in the age of video conferencing for therapy sessions via Zoom, they send those productions to me, like they may text them to me or whatever, and they're coming all the time. They're making all the time. I have certain clients that just really like to express themselves this way. Other people who are less familiar with it, I might just suggest it every once in a while. So we would do the warm-up type activities. I would explain to them kind of what the process of art therapy is all about. And then if they were struggling to explain something in words, I might say, what kind of images come up for you when you think about that? Or if there's a troubling dream that they have, a recurrent dream, one way to process it is by drawing some part of it. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be every single session that they do it, but kind of as needed.
Another question we have is that since making is also a lot about solving problems, is it easier or more difficult for people with that kind of playful art creative mindset to also solve problems? Because going back to kind of what I said earlier, I find I'm a linear problem solver. I want to fix the thing, and sometimes the creative side, it's that getting started is more difficult for me. Whereas I know creatives who will just jump in and then they self-teach and solve the problems as they go along. How do you find that is there really a difference? Is that just kind of a pop psychology myth that there's a difference between analytical and creative? Where is the line between those?
Yeah, I think there really is. People are definitely, some are stronger with logical, analytical, and sequential thinking. They can become really dominant in that way of thinking. And the great thing about art therapy for those people is that it really stretches them, and they may end up revealing things in their drawings that they had no intention of revealing, which is very upsetting to them, but it's an opportunity for them to learn. It's upsetting to them because they feel out of control of it. And usually your logical, analytical kind of person wants to be in control of everything. But it's just such a good experience for them, for that sort of person, to learn that it's safe to explore in this way and learn in this way, and that they can actually get good at it with practice. I don't know. I guess everybody is a little different in terms of how they make that leap and how they begin to explore and reconnect with the child and the playful part. But the thing I always come back to is the environment of safety. So one thing what we're doing from day one in therapy, if you're a good therapist, is you're creating conditions for growth. And that involves a safe environment where the person's not going to be laughed at, criticized, judged. All that's off limits, And once a person has that safety, it sort of grows by itself, you know what I mean, with practice.
We had a comment saying that your pictures to show the examples in each section were very helpful to understand what you meant by each section. I then enjoyed our participation to see our own solution to how we felt as we did it. This was very interesting. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Put up my information here. We're at about 1:20. I don't know if there was any other questions.
I maybe, if I can jump in and I don't know if I can share the screen and then give it back to you if we need to, but I have
Sure.
just a little collage of the screenshot of some of the images that people uploaded as we were doing it.
Wonderful.
Let me see.
Terrific. Can't wait to see those.
Grab these.
Oh, look. Oh, wow. Fantastic. Can you send those to me?
I certainly will.
I love to see the range of things that people do. And if there's more time, we could look at each of those individually and talk through them and see what the person was thinking or feeling. But that's fun. Thank you.
I see you said earlier about there's not really any one interpretation for different colors or dream symbols because those are different to different people. I notice in some of these we have straight lines and in some we have lots of curvy lines. Mm-hmm. Is there a temptation to try to interpret those specifically, or do you always have to let it be guided by the person, the customer, the client?
My personal orientation is to, and this is also in line with the humanistic and existential perspective, is to not overinterpret. Okay, so I think the jaggedy angular lines, such as the image on the lower right, look more energized to me than say the wavy lines on the left, but I don't know for sure. So I would probably defer back to the client's experience, because for some people those wavy lines are scary. They're not calming, really. And so the minute you begin to interpret it, somebody says that's not how they'll correct you. That's one great thing. You get a lot of feedback. If you do something like that and you take a leap and it's wrong, you're going to know it. So that's good. I guess, right?
Right. Well, that looks like we don't have any other questions coming in, so I will stop sharing my screen. We can go back to your info, and any other comments you'd like to add, feel free.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to present today, and I really enjoyed this, and I hope that it was helpful and that you learned a little bit about the process of making and why it's good for our mental health.
And as a reminder to everyone, all of these sessions are recorded, so you can come back if you didn't quite get all of the exercises done, or you want to come back and do this independently on your own again to kind of see how the thing that you make changes over time. That will be available to do that. And of course, we do want you to continue to dialogue with us and participate as we take this not just from today or this week, but on into the future. Thank you very much to Linda for being here with us and the production team for working on this. Thanks to all the attendees for their patience of those first few minutes getting everything connected, but we got through it and it was a great time. I really learned a lot.
Fantastic. Thank you.